said child, they said weak, they said he don't belong. Every word came falling down like thunder in a song. Tiny shoes on polished black, a little cloak of red. One hand held him steady there when the whole room fed. No fire, no scream, no blade in the air. Just one quiet law and a cold silver stare. Mouth still moving, but the sound went thin. The room learned silence when the law stepped in. He chose the light when the dark came near. He chose to run through the teeth of fear. He chose the door, he chose to live. Small don't mean empty, and fear can give.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel, Haerikyron. Welcome to BIM Storytime, where I tell stories from Threnzabul's magnificent menagerie. It's been a minute. Last time, I was playing games. I died, and I had fun. And today, we continue back on the story of Little Light. Last time we were here, Little Light was, well, I guess you could say, experiencing what it was like being somewhere else. However, before I continue saying too much, I'd like to make it very clear. This show is not for children. Is not for children. Is not for children. Okay? Besides that, welcome back, travelers, those who brought snacks, wanderers, and those who generally fell asleep, and those who are just curious. Welcome. I am Bim, and tonight we welcome you back. Just so you understand why I said this is not kids, I think it's more time, right? I know. Shini. Right? That's number 4. Because this tale may contain horror, violence, adult humor, grief, fear, strange wonder, and quiet little moments that wait too long before you realize they may have been an issue for your kid. So, with that in, let's continue. Now that you know, if you decide to take a part of chat, no politics, be civil, get along, no drama, no fighting. Because here we gather for stories, music, imagination, strange company, and the occasional emotional ambush wearing a tiny hat. Tonight's question of the week. Can something small still hold the center while the whole room expects it to break? It's been sitting there for a minute, but you've had time. And I kind of like this one because it feels a little rude, which means it probably matters a little bit. Then I just want you to know this little corner of the world is still growing. I am still growing. Every week, the goal is to not entirely be perfect, but to aim to be just a little bit better. Tell the story a little cleaner, project my voice a little stronger, try not to stumble over my own words, and make sure my silences are sharper, and make sure that my world is understood. And if you are here while this whole thing is being built, and I'm putting everything together and still trying to figure out where I am, I want to thank you for sticking with me here. You've become part of the ritual now. Unfortunate for you, wonderful for me, because like I said, tonight we're returning to the Tale of Little Night. We're going to return back to Chapter 6, Fate-du-Hinge. Last time Little Light stood where no one thought he belonged. Small, shaking, ridiculous, and borrowed formalwear, but still standing. And somewhere in the center, he's not holding his strongest hand. Sometimes it's held by other people who refuse to let go. So grab your drink, grab your snack, grab your blanket, grab your midnight ritual. Those of you who know. And remember, never partake alone. Together we are safe. And when you're at home, you're fine. So never go out operating large vehicles, never go driving if that's the thing you're doing. But anyways, let us begin. Small, shaking, ridiculous, and borrowed former wear. Woo, already messed up. That's fine. But standing, question, a challenge, a problem being measured out loud. Bim stood in the center of the master tent, swallowed nearly whole by an oversized hat and a little cloak that tried very hard to look important on someone far too small for it. The brim dipped towards one eye, his sleeve hung past his wrists. The Polish shoes pinched and squeaked whenever he shifted his weight. He became suddenly and painfully aware of everything about himself, how small his hands were, how young his face was, how thin his voice would be if he were tried to answer, how little he understood about the world staring back at him. The lantern light made every watching face sharper. Masks glinted, horns curved through shadow teeth. Teeth flashed behind painted lips. Velvet seat rose around him in impossible rows, full of creatures, quarters, performers, and things Bim did not yet have names for. All of them looking, all of them measuring, and still, Threnzabul smiled, as if this too was part of the performance, as if doubt had been expected, as if outrage was simply another instrument waiting for its cue. A human? You expect that to hold the center? If something happens, he'll be crushed. He still smells like the outside. He doesn't even know what he is. The voices came from everywhere, all at once, above him, beside him, behind him. Soft voices, sharp voices, voices that clicked and rasped and purred and hissed. One sounded like dry leaves dragged across stone. Another sounded like a violin whose string was pulled too tight. The noise built quickly, overlapping and pressing together until the whole tent seemed to bend around Bim. Doubt, disbelief, contempt. He felt it like weight, heavy and immediate. Each word another hand shoving him down on his shoulders. The scent of the tent thickened around him, too. Velvet dust, sugar, old smoke, perfume, wax, animal musk, and something strange beneath it all. Something ancient and watchful, like rain trapped inside wood for 100 years. Bim flinched. He shrank beneath the storm of voices, one hand tightening on the brim of his oversized hat, while the other curled uselessly at his side. His thumb found the seam of his sleeves, and he worried at it. His stomach had gone cold. His throat had felt full of wool. For one brief moment, one awful moment, he looked exactly like what they were calling him. A child, small, breakable. The word human seemed to hang on to him like something dirty. Van didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her hand settled on Bim's shoulder. Firm, warm, absolute. Not squeezing, not pulling him back, simply there. The sound nearest them died first. A row of whispers cut short. Then the next. Then the next. Silence spread outward from her like frost across glass. The movement it moved through the tent. It moved through the seats in a visible wave, catching mouths half open, hands mid-gesture, smiles unfinished. The tent did not become quiet all at once. It submitted piece by piece, until even the lantern flame seemed careful. Van's spiraling eyes moved slowly towards the crowd. There was no rush in her gaze, no anger that needed to prove itself, which made things feel worse. If any of you would like to test whether he is protected, she said evenly, you may start with me. No one laughed. No one breathed too loudly. The air changed. The warmth of the tent sharpened into something cleaner, colder. The scent of velvet and sugar thinned beneath the sudden bite of rain, hot metal, and flint being struck by steel. Bim looked up at her. Anne did not look down. Her gaze stayed on the crowd, steady and terrible in its calm. He survived what chased him, she continued. He stood in lantern light while something older than most of you and your bloodlines tried to tear through the barrier to reach him. Her hand tightened slightly on his shoulder. Not enough to hurt, but enough to remind him that he was not standing alone. He chose. The word landed hard. Not shouted, not decorated, just spoken into the center of the tent like a nail driven cleanly through wood. Threnzabul's smile deepened, but he said nothing. That somehow made the world feel even heavier. Bim's fingers loosened a little on his sleeve. Chose. He remembered the lantern, the dark trees, the thing wearing grief like a voice. His legs hurting, his lungs burning, the terrible pull behind him, the light ahead. He had not felt brave then. He had only felt scared enough to move. Van's voice lowered. And if the center requires someone who can stand after losing everything, then perhaps you should all be less concerned about his size. Her eyes burned brighter. The spirals within them turned slowly, like old doors opening somewhere deep beneath the world. And more concerned that he is still standing. The tent went silent. Truly silent now. Not the silent of shock, the silent of something listening. Bim's throat tightened. Not from fear this time. Something else. Something warm and painful pressed up against his ribs, too large for the little space it had been given. He did not know what to do with it. He did not even know what it was. No one had said it that way before. No one had made running sound like a thing that counted. Van finally looked down at him. Her face was still stern. Her hand was still steady. But her voice, when it came, was just for him. Head up, little light, she murmured. So Bim lifted his chin. The hat slipped. He caught it quickly with both hands, cheeks warming. The crowd watched, rows and rows of impossible eyes fixed on him beneath maroon shadow and gold lantern glow. This time, no one laughed. Van didn't need to smile. She didn't need to threaten twice. She simply lifted one finger into the air. Those who have spoken out of turn, she said calmly, will not speak again until the lesson is learned. Her tone was quiet, almost gentle, which made the room feel awkward. There was no anger in it, no strain, no raised chin or sharpened breath, no need to drag authority into the room by force. The law in her voice arrived already complete, as if the world itself had already been waiting for her to say it aloud. And then, silence. Total, complete silence. The voices cut off mid-word, not faded, not hushed. Cut. Mouth still moved, nothing came out. A woman on the second row clapped both hands over her throat, eyes going wide behind a silver half mask somewhere higher up. A horned man tried to finish whatever insult he had been forming on his tongue and produced only a desperate, breathless shape. Another figure half rose from their seat, jaw working around the sound that no longer belonged to them, before freezing as realization passed over their face. The silence was not passing. It held them perfectly, not like a hand over the mouth, like a locked door. Van lowered her hand. No dramatic gesture, no flash of light, no swirl of power curling from her fingers, no visible force at all, just certainty. The master tent had heard her and obeyed. Bim stared, wide-eyed. His own breath sounded too loud now. Even the tiny scrape of his shoe against the floor made him flinch. He looked from the suddenly voiceless crowd to Ben, then slowly back again. Slowly, very slowly, he tugged at the sleeve hanging over his hand. Did he looked at the crowd? Several silent voices stared back at him in horror, apology, or both. Did you take their talking? Ben blinked, then looked down at him. The room remained utterly silent. A few silent figures stared pleadingly at her. One of them nodded very fast, as if agreeing with whatever answer might get their voice returned sooner. Someone else had both their hands over their mouths as though trying to manly keep the problem contained. Ben considered the question with complete seriousness. Temporarily. Bim looked back at them. Someone in the third row looked deeply apologetic. Someone else looked terrified. One person had their mouth open as wide as possible and was now patting the side of their cheeks, apparently checking whether the rest of their face still worked and or was still there. Bim stared. You can do that? Ben folded her arms. Yes. Another another pause went by, a small brief breath. The lanterns ticked softly overhead. A little thread of wax slid down one candle and hardened before it reached the rim. Bim swallowed. That's kinda scary. The answer came completely honest. Not accusation, not judgment, just fact. The room went still in a different way after that. Van did too. For the first time since stepping into the master tent, her expression shifted, just slightly, a small pause behind her eyes, because children said things adults avoided, because they said true things without aiming at them, because there had been no fear in his voice, only observation. Van looked at him, hat slipping down slowly. Tiny tucks, small hands, completely serious eyes. For a moment, the immense master tent seemed to balance itself on that little truth between them. Van's mouth softened by the smallest measure, not into a smile, but into something that remembered she was not only law. Then, very carefully, Bim looked towards the silent crowd again. Rows of impossible beings watched him from behind stolid voices, some proud, some embarrassed, some still angry, though anger looked much less impressive when it could not announce itself. Bim's fingers curled at the edge of his sleeve. Can can they have it back? Silence. Absolute silence. The question moved through the tent more powerfully than any spell. One figure in the audience physically clutched their chest. Another lowered their head, visibly ruined by the mercy of a child they had mocked less than a moment ago. Ben stared at Bim. Bim stared back, unsure whether he had asked something foolish. He was not trying to be noble. He was not trying to forgive anyone properly. He only knew that having something taken away sounded awful, and maybe being mean should not mean being silent forever. Not unless they were still being mean. The hat slid again. This time he did not catch it quickly enough. The brim slipped over one eye. Behind him, Threnzabul made a very small sound. Very small, very dangerous. Because he was trying not to laugh. Van turned slowly, very slowly towards him. Threnzabul immediately looked elsewhere, far elsewhere. He studied the ceiling, the architecture. A lantern hook. The invisible burden of existence itself, anywhere, except Ben. Ben kept staring. Threnzabul's smile twitched at the corner. Only once. Then he rearranged his face into something dignified and entirely unconvincing. Ben looked back down at Bim, and something softened. Not visibly, not much, just enough. Her hand settled slightly atop his oversized hat, steadying it before the brim could betray him one more time. Perhaps, she said quietly, if they learn something. Bim thought hard about that. the kind of hard thinking that pulled his little brow into a knot and made his mouth press into a serious line. Then he looked towards the crowd. Rows and rows of impossible beings stared back at him, waiting, watching, some still proud, some still embarrassed, some afraid in a way they clearly did not enjoy. Bim's face curled at the edge of Bim's fingers curled at the edge of his sleeve. Sorry about that. He did not know how to teach a tent full of monsters and nobles and performers anything at all. He did not know what lesson ban meant. He only knew what had hurt and what had not helped. Beneath the giant hat and little cloak, Bim swallowed, then spoke softly. Don't be mean. Silence, not laughter. No movement, not even from Threnzabul, because somehow that landed harder than the law itself had. The words had no magic in them, no command, nor threat. Only a child's small, plain rule placed in the center of a room that had forgotten how heavy simple things could be. Ban let the silence hold for one more breath. Then another. Her gaze moved over the crowd, measuring faces, shame, stubbornness, fear. At last, her eyes shifted deeper into the tent. I see no complaint from the inner circle, she said. The words were calm, but they turned the room with them. Then followed her gaze. Further back beneath the softer lantern light, where the shadows thickened around the edge, sat a quieter cluster he had barely noticed before. Now he did. Something about them felt different. Not louder, not larger, worse, completely still. They sat in the kind of silence that did not mean absence. It meant control. One figure wore a mask of polished ivory, with no eyes cut in it at all. The smooth face reflected the lanterns and thin gold lines, but nothing behind it moved. Another sat wrapped in layered cloth and silver chains, hands folded neatly in their lap, face hidden completely beneath drifting veils, every chain resting perfectly still, as if the metal knew better than to make a noise. A third appeared to be made entirely of black feathers and long fingers. The feathers drank in the light instead of reflecting it. The fingers rested over the arm of the chair like a patient spider. None of them reacted. None of them spoke. They simply watched. And somehow that felt heavier than all the shouting had. Bim's mouth went dry. The jeering crowd had been frightening because it was loud. These figures were frightening because they did not need to be. Ben's hand remained lightly on his hat. This is all that matters. The silence remained, hanging over the tent like a drawn blade. Bim looked up at Ban. Really looked. And for the first time, he saw something beyond her warmth, beyond the calm of her voice, beyond the steady hands and quiet guidance. He saw what she was in this place. Not just kind, not just safe, powerful, not the loud kind, not the kind that needed to prove or introduce itself, the kind that simply was. A person who could raise one finger and make a room remember its throat belonged to her law. Ben noticed him staring. One brow lifted slightly. Bim looked away immediately, cheeks warming beneath the shadow of his brim. Threnzabul smiled. Threnzabul smiled. His smile widened, as if Ben's display had not interrupted the moment at all, as if it had improved it. Much better. Threnzabul turned again, pacing slowly as he spoke, his voice carrying through the master tent with effortless ease. He did not need volume any more than Bond did. Where Bond's authority settled like law, Threnzabul moved like music. It slipped through the rows, caught on velvet and polished bone, candle and flame, and made every listening thing lead toward him before it realized it had moved. I am sure some of you are wondering. The cane struck the floor once, clean, measured. Why a child? Why a human? The sound echoed softly beneath the vast canvas ceiling, climbing into the lantern hung dark and returning thinner, stranger, as if even the tent wanted to hear the answer twice. Bim watched him move, watched the long coat shift around his legs, watched the red and the magenta gleam in his spiraling eyes, watched the way the room followed him without realizing it. Every eye, every breath, every thought. Even the ones who still could not speak seemed to listen louder than they had ever shouted. Bim stood under all of it, one hand hovering near the brim of his hat in case it decided to humiliate him one more time. His other hand stayed curled near his side, half hidden in his sleeve that still did not belong to him. The word human still had not left him. It still clung, like mud on the hem of a new coat, like something that made him smaller in their mouths. Thenzabul tapped the cane once more, a clean, deliberate sound. I could answer that in one word. Silence. Even the lantern seemed to hold still. Bim felt Ban glance towards him, felt the crowd waiting, felt the weight of eyes settle over the little tux, the giant hat and tiny cloak. He wished suddenly that he knew where to put his hands, wished he could stand better, look braver, be less obviously something that had cried recently. Fencible stopped walking, turned and smiled. Not theatrical now, not entirely. Something older sat behind it, something certain. Choice. Nothing happened for half a second. The murmurs tried to ripple through the tent, through the crowd. Not loud, not hostile. They could not be, not beneath Ban's law. But the reaction moved anyway, in shoulders, in widened eyes, in heads turning slightly towards one another, and fingers tightening over the arms of chairs. Confused, questioning, unsettled. Choice. Bim blinked. The word did not sound grand to him. It sounded like mud, branches, running until his chest hurt. It sounded like the dark behind him wearing voices it had no right to wear. It sounded like not turning back. Vegetable spread his arms slowly. He was chased. He ran. He reached our lantern. His gaze shifted towards Bim. For one strange moment, the whole tent seemed to shift with it. And when offered comfort, he still chose. Bim's throat tightened. He remembered Ban's hand, the lantern light, the terrible edge of the barrier. The way safety had not felt simple because everything behind him was gone and everything ahead of him was impossible. He had not known he was choosing anything important. He had just been tired, scared, and alive. Vegetable pointed lightly with his cane. He chose to step into the light. He chose shelter. He chose a future he didn't even understand. Each strike traveled through the floor and climbed up Bim's two large shoes. And most importantly, silence settled again. Deeper this time, Thenzabul looked around the tent. Not just at the crowd, at the rows, at the shadows, at the lanterns, at the quiet inner circles sitting like old secrets beneath softer light. at Ben, who had still rested near Bim with easy readiness as someone who would break the world's fingers before anyone get too close. Then, finally, back to Bim, at the crowd, back to the inner circle, back to Bon, and again, finally, back to Bim. He chose us. No one spoke, no one moved. Not even the silence one seemed to struggle against Bon's law for that breath, because suddenly the little boy in borrowed clothes and ridiculous hat felt different standing there. Not smaller, not larger, something chosen. The word changed the shape of him in the room. Only a little, but a little was enough. Bim felt it happen without understanding how. The same eyes were on him, the same lanterns turned overhead, the same velvet floor waited beneath his squeaking shoes. But the staring had shifted. Before, they had looked at him like something dropped in the wrong place. Now, they look at him like something placed. And beneath the brim of his giant hat, Bim looked down at his tiny shoes because some part of him realized something strange. For the first time since the house, since running, crying, since the dark had worn voices it did not own, someone was talking about him like he had done something brave. Not lucky, not foolish, not lost. Brave. The word hurt in a place he didn't even know could hurt. He swallowed and stared harder at his shoes because looking up felt suddenly far too dangerous. Then, Thenzabul's smile sharpened back into place. But where is the fun in that? The warmth broke. Not cruelly, just enough to remind the room who was speaking. Thenzabul began to circle. Never hurried, never uncertain. Each step was measured with the effort of confidence of someone who had never once doubted the room would ever follow them. His cane tapped softly beside him, silver against dark floor, each sound neat as a pin pushed through velvet. This is no ordinary child. He gestured lightly towards Bim. She can attest to that. She bore witness to him. Ben said nothing. She did not need to. Her hand remained steady on Bim's shoulder, and somehow that was enough of an answer. More than just an answer, a warning. Bim leaned into the warmth by the smallest little amount without meaning to. Thornsable eyes flicked to him. He is a vessel. The air shifted, subtle but real. Not enough for a child to understand, perhaps, but enough for everyone else to feel. The word settled differently than the others had, heavier somehow, older, as though it belonged to something that had existed long before speech learned how to dress itself up in sound. The lantern flames bent inward. The shadows under their seats seemed to tighten. Ben's hand went still. For the unsealed prince. A murmur tried to move through the crowd, but it failed. Silence still held them under Ben's command, but the reaction lived on anyways. Widened eyes, tightened shoulders, and hands gripping the arms of chairs. The sudden tension that had passed through the master tent like cold wire being pulled taut. Even the inner circles seemed sharper in the half light, though none of them moved. Bim stood very still. He did not know what an unseelie prince was. The word sounded pretty in the wrong way, like a knife with a jewel in its handle, like something from a story grown old enough to become hungry. But he knew it. He knew what it meant when a room full of dangerous people reacted to a name they could not say. The hat slipped over his brow again. This time, he didn't fix it. Ben did for him. Carefully, two fingers lifted the brim back up over his eyes. Her touch was gentle. Her gaze never left Threnzabul. And I, Threnzabul continued smoothly, will have none of it. He stopped, turned. The cane angled slightly at his side. The whole seemed to lean towards the next thought. What if? His voice dropped just a little, enough to pull everyone closer. Instead of allowing that, a smile touched his mouth. Not kind, not cruel, but certain. We take this vessel. The word made Bim's stomach twist. Vessel, like a cup, like a jar, like something hollow, like something meant to hold something else. For one awful second, he imagined himself with no room inside him for his own thoughts, no room for his mother's voice, no room for a dinosaur joke that his father had made, no room for the small, scared part of him that still wanted to go home. Ben's fingers tightened on his shoulder, not to hold him down, to hold him there. Principal's spiring eyes burned brighter. And make him a lock. The tent seemed to inhale after that. Even the silent ones reacted then. A shifting of bodies, a trembling of hands. 100 voiceless protesters caught behind sealed mouths. The sound did not return, but panic had its own language. Fingers dug into velvet armrests, painted mouths opened around nothing. Something with antlers lowers his head as it's bracing against a storm only it could sense. Threnzabull's smile widened. Yes, he said softly. There it is. He turned slowly, addressing every watching face. Fear, recognition, memory. He tapped his cane once. Good. Keep those. They are useful emotions when handled properly. Ben looked up at Ben. Is a vessel a box? He whispered. The question was tiny, but the silence of the master tent carried it anyway. Ben looked down at him. For the first time since stepping into the room, she seemed angry. Not at him, at the shape of the truth around him. The way grown things kept finding careful words for terrible intentions. It means someone thinks they can use you, she said quietly. Bim swallowed. Oh, the words were small, too small for the fear that followed it. He looked down at himself without meaning to, at the fitted cloak, at the still felt borrowed, at his hands, at the space beneath his ribs where his own breath lived. Use you like a tool, like a key, like a thing picked up because it opened something. Principal's gaze softened by the smallest degree. And they are mistaken. The words landed firmly. The lanterns above flickered once in golden agreement. You are not his, Principal said, looking directly at Bim now. You are not waiting to become someone's door. His smile returned, sharp and bright. You are mine. Ben shot him a look. Principal sighed. Ours. Ben's look sharpened. He corrected smoothly. Your own, under our protection. Ben nodded once. Better. Ben looked between them, not fully understanding, but understanding enough. There was something inside this conversation that wanted to swallow him whole. Something with a pretty name, something old enough to make monsters afraid. And for some reason, these strange, impossible people were arguing over how to stop it. Not over whether he mattered, not over whether he was worth saving, over the terms. Only over the terms. That made his throat ache in a way he did not know how to name. Sensible turned back to his tent as if he were not speaking about a frightened child in borrowed clothes, as if he were presenting the opening move of something far grander. His smile returned. and make him a pillar. The words landed with a strange kind of force. Not loud, not dramatic, deliberate enough to feel like a decision being carved into place. Bim stood very still beneath the oversized hat. Vessel, lock, pillar, Fate-du-Hinge. The words were too large for him, too full of meaning everyone else seemed to understand before he did. He only knew they made the room feel colder and bigger, and made the eyes watching him seem less amused than they had been before. Ben leaned closer, her voice low enough that it belonged first to him, even if the whole tent heard it. Something wanted you open, she said quietly. He means to teach you how to close. Ben's fingers tightened at his side. Close, the word he understood a little better. Close the door, close the window, close your eyes when something was too terrible to look at, close your hands around the last thing you still had. He nodded once, though he was not sure. Rather, he meant yes, or I hear you, or please do not let it open me. Principal stepped closer. We train him, he said. We shape him. I lend him my power. Until he finds his own. A small tilt of his head. As Ben has. Ben's expression did not change, but something in her eyes did. A flicker. Not pride, not exactly. Recognition. Something old passed between them without needing language. Bim noticed it and did not understand it, which made it feel more important. Principal's gaze sharpened slightly as he spoke the next words, and something in the tent seemed to listen more carefully. Law. The lantern steadied. Their flames pulled straight and still, no longer trembling in the high canvas dark. Control. The shadows beneath the seat drew inward, holding themselves close as if remembering where their edges belonged. Domain. The words pressed gently against Bim's chest, not painfully, not kind, but heavy. Each word felt with weight. Not just titles, principles, promises, things that sounded less like magic and more like rules the world had once agreed to obey. The air smelled suddenly of warm brass, old smoke, and rain against stone. Then, Principal's attention shifted back to Bim. A soft tap of his cane again. The sound traveled through the floor and up through Bim's two large shoes. But the reason he was chosen? Threnzabul crouched slightly, just enough to bring those spiraling eyes closer to Bim's level, not lowering himself to him, but meeting the moment, which somehow made Bim feel worse and made Threnzabul look even kinder. Bim swallowed that. The hat slid again. This time, Threnzabul reached out and lifted the brim with his two fingers from his gloved hand. The touch was precise and careful, as if even the ridiculous hat deserved a ceremony. There you are, he murmured, then blinked up at him, caught for one strange second in those red and magenta spiraling eyes. Then Threnzabul turned his gaze towards the silent crowd. He was chosen because he ran. A few faces shifted, confused, disappointed, maybe. Some looked as though they had been cheated out of a better myth. Threnzabul smiled. Yes, I know. The answer you all wanted. He straightened slowly, the shadows floating neatly around him as though they, too, had been trained to behave. You expected bloodline, prophecy, an ancient mark, birthright carved into his bones by something subtly dramatic. How tedious, Ben muttered. Says the man standing under 1,000 lanterns making a public declaration. Threnzabul ignored her with magnificent discipline. He ran from the thing that wanted him, he continued. He ran from a house that had already begun becoming a mouth. He ran when grief and voices he loved. He ran from when grief called him and voices he loved. He ran when hope tried to trick him into turning back. Bim went very still. The words did not show him everything, but they showed enough. Walls bending wrong, darkness in familiar corners, a voice that almost sounded like home. That was what made it cruel. His gaze dropped to the floor, but Threnzabul's voice followed him gently, not letting him hide, not letting the room mistake his fear for weakness. And then, when offered light, he chose to step into it. The tent remained silent. Even those who could not speak seemed to be listening differently now, less like judges and more like witnesses. That is the beginning of law, which is annoying, but Bim blinked. Principal's smile softened. To know what must not be allowed to reach you. Ben, is that not law? Ben's hand rested gently on Bim's shoulder again, warm, steady, like a door closing behind him, a hand keeping it shut. Never mind. And control, Principal continues. Begins the moment fear does not make the choice for you. Bim looked down at his small hands. He didn't feel controlled. He felt tired. He felt scared and small. His heart still jumped too fast at loud sounds. His legs still remembered running. His chest still hurt in places crying had left sore. But Man's fingers squeezed his shoulder once. Just once, enough to remind him that he was still standing. And maybe standing counted, even when everything inside him wanted to sit down and disappear. Principal lifted his cane towards the vast tent. And domain? His voice deepened. I went higher. The lanterns above seemed to listen. Is what you build when you decide what belongs inside the circle with you. A long hush followed. The words made Bim think of chalk lines, blanket boards, closed doors, the lantern in the dark, Ben standing behind him, things inside, the things outside. Then Thrensible looked down at him again. So, yes, he said, a child. A human. His smile returned, sharp and bright, and perhaps the only person in this tent who understood the assignment before knowing there ever was one. Van sighed. That was almost sincere. I'm capable of sincerity. You're allergic to it. I manage symptoms elegantly. Bim looked between them, still frightened, still confused, but breathing a little easier. Not because he understood, he so totally didn't. And not because the danger had become smaller, it so totally hadn't, but because Ban and Threnzabul were speaking over his head in the way adults sometimes did when things were terrible, and somehow that bickering made the terrible things feel less lonely. The hat slipped down over both eyes. Threnzabul stared. Ban stared. Bem reached up and shoved it back up into place with both hands. The silence in the master tent strained dangerously. 100 stolen voices pressed against Ban's law. Not in protest this time, but in the desperation and the effort of not laughing. Vegetable closed his eyes for one long, pained second. Oh, he murmured, this is perfect. He leaned in just slightly, lowering himself to the moment without ever truly diminishing his presence. The fleeting mortal spirit. His voice dropped, almost conversational now, as though he were sharing a secret too elegant to waste on volume, a remarkable catalyst when working with the weave. Bim didn't understand those words fully. Not pillar, not weave, not what it meant to be chosen, because he was mortal in a place that seemed built for things older and stranger than death itself. But he understood enough to know he was being discussed like something important, like something useful. That part frightened him a little. Useful things could be kept, useful things could be used up, useful things got put on a shelf or locked in cupboards or carried into rooms where no one asked whether they wanted to go. His fingers tightened around the cuff of his sleeves. The fabric was soft, too soft. Everything here was too soft around things that had sharp edges. Dan must have felt him tense because her hand shifted gently at his back, soft and steady, a reminder saying, I am here. Ben breathed in. The air tasted faintly of candle smoke, dusted sugar, and the cold metallic edge of Ben's law still hanging over every sealed throat. Principal straightened again. I need not explain the potency of a child's imagination. His eyes gleamed beneath the brim of his hat, red and magenta spirals turning with slow and settling life. Give him time. You will see. The words moved through the tent like smoke, quiet and impossible to hold, impossible not to breathe in. Somewhere in the crowd, a silent figure leaned back as if the statement had touched them. The inner circle did not move at all. That made Bim notice them again. That made him wish that they hadn't. Then, Fedzible stepped forward, closing the final distance between them and him. Bim held still. The room felt enormous around them. The throne, the silent crowd, the inner circle watching without blinking, Banslaw hanging over every throat, the lanterns burning gold and maroon above him like 100 painted eyes. The weight of the words he did not understand pressing in from all sides: vessel, lock, pillar, mortal, weave, chosen. The oversized hat suddenly felt heavier on his head, like his cloak suddenly seemed too bright. Shouldn't have been like, I apologize. His cloak seemed a little too bright. His hands looked too small. Principal's gloved hand came and rested on Bim's shoulder, lightly, not gripping, not trapping, but the touch carried weight anyways. The kind that made the entire tent lean closer without moving. Bim looked up. Principal's expression had softened, enough to make him more frightening somehow, because sharp smiles and grand speeches were easier to understand. This was quieter. This had no costume over it. Do not mistake this for burden alone, he said quietly. The words were meant for Bim, not the crowd, not Van, just him. You are not here because you are empty enough to fill. You are here because you are still yourself after something tried very, very hard to make you otherwise. Bim swallowed. His throat hurt. The words went somewhere deep, somewhere bruised. He thought of the house, of the dark, of the voice that should have been safe, of running so hard his chest felt like it might split. He thought of stepping into the lantern light without knowing whether it would save him or burn him. Still yourself. He did not know if that was true. He felt changed already. His clothes had changed. His name had changed. People kept looking at him like he had become a question they were all waiting to answer. But inside, beneath the fear and the tiredness, the strange warmth of Threnzabul's hand, there was still a small place that felt like Bim. Small, shaking, but there. I don't feel important, he whispered. Threnzabul smile returned, small, sharp, almost kind. Excellent. Bim blinked. Excellent. Importance ruins people. Who noticed it too early? Ben muttered. You would know. Principal did not look away from Bim. I heard that. You were meant to. A faint ripple of silent amusement passed through the crowd, visible only in shoulders and eyes and hands pressed quietly over mouths that still could not speak. Principal's gaze stayed fixed on the boy. You need not understand today, he said. You need only to stand. Bim's fingers curled into the oversized sleeve of his tuxedo, the fabric bunched in his fist, soft and strange. Still not his, even though everyone kept talking as if everything around him had already begun belonging to him. I'm tired. I imagine so. I'm scared. Reasonable. I don't know how to be that. He didn't know which word he meant. Fate-du-Hinge, pillar, little master, any of it. The words were all too tall. They stood around him like doors with handles he could not reach. Threnzabul lifted his head. Good. Bim frowned. You keep saying that. Because fearful, honest foundations are better than confidently rotten ones. Ben sighed. That was almost wise. I know. I'm recovering. The corner of Bim's mouth twitched before he could stop it. Small, quick, almost there, then not. But Threnzabul noticed it. His glove hand gave the smallest reassuring pressure against Bim's shoulder. Then he turned towards the silent crowd once more. This is what I chose. The lanterns overhead burned steadier. This child, this mortal, this frightened, ridiculous, hat-burdened little creature. Bim looked wounded. Ben leaned down and whispered, He means it affectionately. I do, Threnzabul said without looking back. Bim did not look convinced. The crowd remained utterly still. Threnzabul's voice deepened. And if any of you believe yourselves better suited to question my choice, His smile thinned into something beautiful and dangerous. Then by all means, learn to speak first. Dan's law held. No one made a sound. Because they agreed. Because they could not. The silence bowed around him. For one breath, Bim felt the shape of those stolen voices pressing against the air. Not gone, not destroyed, only held back by Ban's will, like water behind glass. Then warmth spread to the point of contact at his shoulder. Not painful, not comforting either. It felt like being marked by attention itself, as if the moment Threnzabul touched him, the entire menagerie shifted and made the room what he had decided Bim would eventually become. Above him, the lantern flames leaned inward, listening. The floor beneath Bim's feet hummed once, low and deep, the sound too old to belong to wood or canvas, as though something far below the master tent had heard the decision and agreed to remember it. Bim looked up at Threnzabul beneath the slipped brim of the oversized hat. And for the first time, the little master no longer sounded entirely like a joke. Not completely, not safely. Let me help you, Threnzabul said, warmth and a sudden pull. Bim felt it before he understood it. It began where Threnzabul's glove had rested on his shoulder. A spreading heat, smooth and immediate, like sunlight poured straight into his bones. His breath caught. The world tilted slightly beneath him, not enough to make him fall, just enough to make everything feel briefly unhooked, as though reality had loosened its grip and was waiting for someone else to decide its shape. The lanterns blurred. The crowd stretched into smears of maroon, gold, ivory, and shadow. Bim's stomach swooped in the way it did when a step that was lower was skipped. Ben's hand shifted instantly at his back, steadying, watching, ready, not stopping it, but ready to. That mattered. Bim clung Bim clung to that more than the warmth, more than Threnzabull's hand, more than the hum beneath his shoes. Ben was there. So he did not run. He only shut his eyes for half a second and held still while the impossible thing reached through him. Then the world steadied. Bim grew. Not much, but enough. A few inches at most. Just enough to pull him into the clothes that had swallowed him only moments ago. The sleeves settled properly at the wrist. The coat straightened across the shoulders. The little tux fitted itself neatly along his frame, no longer drowning him in borrowed fabric. The collar no longer tried to climb his jaw. The cuffs no longer hit his hands. The shoes stopped dragging awkwardly beneath him and planted him cleanly against the floor. The cloak fell correctly from his shoulders now, red velvet hanging in a small dignified line behind him. For one stunned second, Bim forgot to breathe. Everything felt almost right. The hat still slipped. That didn't change. It dipped over one eye with the perfect betrayal. Bim pushed it back up with both hands. For one dangerous second, the entire master tent looked ready to lose itself again. Thenzabul stared at the hat. Ben stared at the hat. Bim stared at both of them. It's still too big, he whispered. Thenzabul's mouth curved slowly. Yes, he said, sounding deeply pleased. Some burdens are symbolic. Ben closed her eyes. Do not make the hat philosophical. It became philosophical the moment it resisted destiny. It's a hat. It's a stubborn hat. Bim touched the brim carefully. It's alive? Thenzabul and Ben both paused. Then at the exact same time, no. Thenzabul added, probably not. Ben shot him a look sharp enough to silence several people who were already silenced. Bim lowered his hand from the brim very slowly. The crowd remained voiceless beneath Ben's law, but the feeling moved through them had changed. The laughter was gone now, so was the jeering. They were looking at him differently, not with certainty, not with acceptance, but attention, the kind given to a door that had just opened where a wall used to be. Bim stood beneath the lanterns, a little taller than before, still small, still frightened, still holding up a hat too large for his head, but no longer quiet and so swallowed by everything around him. Thenzabul removed his hands from Bim's shoulder. The warmth remained, faint and deep, waiting beneath the skin like a candle protected from wind. There, he said softly, a little better. Bim looked down at himself, at the coat, the shoes, the cloak, his hands. Still his hands, only slightly bigger. He turned them over slowly, palms up, then down again, as if the answer might be written somewhere in the lines. His fingers flexed. They obeyed. His breath came in. His chest rose. Nothing inside him screamed. Nothing inside him answered in someone else's voice. Still, his throat tightened. Am I still me? The question cut through the tent more sharply than any declaration had. No one shifted. No one smiled. Even Threnzabul's grandness seemed to step back from it. Ben's expression softened at once. Threnzabuls' smile faded into something quieter. Yes, he said, no flourish, no joke. No performance wrapped around the word to make it prettier than it needed to be. Yes, little master, you are still you. Ben crouched slightly beside him, brushing the cloak straight at his shoulders. And you will remain so, she added firmly. Firmly enough that the words felt less like comfort and more like a rule she had already written somewhere in the somewhere the world would have to obey. Bim looked between them, then down at his shoes again. They no longer squeaked when he shifted his weight. For some reason, that made him feel a little sad. The old squeak had been embarrassing, ridiculous, and too loud, but it had also been his. A tiny proof that he was still small enough for shoes to complain about him. Threnzabul noticed. With one light tap of his cane, the left shoe gave a tiny squeak. Small, bright, perfectly absurd. I lost an ear. My ear fell off. That's why. We're good. Nobody noticed, right? Oh, God. Nah. We're about halfway, aren't we? Yeah, we're almost halfway. We got a little bit going. Some things, he said, are worth preserving. Then, the world's steady, slightly taller, still holding up a hat that refused to respect destiny, and somewhere deep beneath the master tent, the menagerie listened. Power for loyalty, a place in exchange for a burden far too large for a child to understand. Bim stood in the center of it all, clothes finally fitting, hat slipping, Threnzabull's warmth still fading from his shoulder as he felt the shape of promise settling around him before he had any real way to understand it. It did not feel like chains, not exactly. It felt more like someone had placed a key in his hand while he was still too small to know which door opened it. Which door it opened, I apologize. The center of the menagerie. The center of the menagerie, Thrinsbull said. The heart we call the carnies. His gaze returned to Bim. Steady, spiraling, far too certain. Soon, I will send you to train with them. But only if you can handle the law ban. Ben made no face. Ben made a face, not offended, not pleased either, just tired in a very specific way, the kind of tired that had history. Oh no. Bim looked up. Oh no. Ben stared into the middle distance, as though she had just seen a future version of herself, regretting everything. That sounded like future problems. Threnzabull ignored her completely. If you can withstand her domain, he continued, then you can withstand anything the carnies will throw at you. Bim blinked. What is a carnies? Silence. Not uncomfortable silence, thinking silence. The sort of silence that happened when an entire room knew several answers, and none of them were safe. Thunderbolt tilted his head. Ben immediately looked suspicious. No. Thunderbolt looked at her. No. No. He looked wounded. I have not said anything. You're about to. I was merely considering the best way to explain. Ben folded her arms. You were considering theatrics. Thrensible paused. Perhaps. Ben pointed at him. No. Then Thrensible looked down at Bim with complete seriousness. They are a collection of highly responsible and emotional, stable individuals. Silence. Absolute silence. Ben just stared. The inner circle stared. Several members of the crowd just stared. One person physically lowered their head in their hands. Even the lantern seemed disappointed. Thrensible held his expression perfectly. Bim looked around. Why is everyone making faces? Ben closed her eyes. For a very long time. Silence filled the room. Then, the carnies, she said carefully, are the people who are like the lifeblood of the menagerie. Bim looked up at her. The strongest? Ben paused. Sometimes. The smartest? An even longer pause. Occasionally. The nicest? Absolute silence. Thunderbolt looked towards the ceiling. Ben slowly turned towards him. He avoided eye contact instantly. Bim watched us with growing concern. Are they not nice? Ben's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the crowd, a voiceless person made a helpless little gesture that somehow communicated define nice. Ben pinched the bridge of her nose. They are capable, she finished. That was diplomatic, Principal said. That was survival. Ben looked between them. Increasingly unsure whether training with the Carnies was an honor or a punishment or some kind of elaborate prank everyone had agreed not to explain to him. The hat slid down. He shoved it back up. Principal watched this happen with visible effort. Visible effort, not a smile. Then he stepped back, drawing himself once more into his full presence. His cane settled lightly at his side. The room breathed with him. If you survive Ban, he announced grandly, then you may survive the Carnies. Ban sighed. Please stop presenting me as if I'm an environmental hazard. I present you as accurately as possible. She muttered something beneath her voice. Bim was fairly certain it was not polite. Ben slowly turned towards him. He avoided eye contact again. Then, Venerable spread his arms wide, theatrical and certain. Welcome to the menagerie, Bim. The words rang up into the canvas heights and settled there amongst the lanterns. Not a question, not an invitation anymore. A declaration. Bim stood beneath it with one hand still gripping the brim of his hat, unsure whether he was supposed to bow, wave, hide, or say thank you to several hundred impossible beings all around him at once. Ben looked over the crowd. Her eyes moved slowly, carefully, one by one, heads lowered. Not all in shame, some in respect, some in understanding, some because they knew better than to do anything else when Ben was still holding every voice in the room between her fingers. Enough. Ben lowered her hand. Sound returned. Not all at once. At first, it came back in fragments. The rustle of fabric, a sharp inhale somewhere in the crowd, the scrape of a shoe against polished floor, a cough that sounded half relieved and half offended. Someone else whispered, Oh, someone else whispered, Finally! Then, applause, not polite, not careful, but real. Applause. It rolled outward in waves across the master tent, filling the massive space with warmth, sound, and movement. It climbed, rose, struck the canvas, shook the lantern light until gold trembled across every mask and painted face. The voices eventually returned all at once, layered over one another in a startled burst. Oh, thank God! I thought I forgot how speaking worked. Ben, that was horrifying. Can he always do the hat thing? I still think Threnzabul is better. Ben pointed instantly. No! Too late. Far too late. Because somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, Threnzabul, then another voice, Threnzabul, then another, delighted by the danger of it. Oh, Threnzabul. Then, like a spark touched by dry leaves, the word spread. Softly at first, then louder, smiling, laughing, affectionate, ridiculous, unstoppable. Threnzabul. Little Threnzabul, look at him. Tiny little Threnza dude. He's got the hat just like the master. Ben went completely still. The kind of still that made Nearby laughter immediately reconsider its life choices. Very slowly, very, very slowly, she turned towards Threnzabul. He had already turned away, studying absolutely nothing, whistling poorly, with the air of a man who had never once in his life caused a problem and could not imagine why anyone might look at him now. Ben looked up. The applause crashed around him, louder and warmer than the jeering had ever been, but somehow almost as overwhelming. It pressed against his ears and chest. It made the lantern seem brighter. It made the tent feel closer. Only now, the faces were smiling, and that helped, just a little. It also made things feel stranger. What's happening? Bim asked. Ben stared at the ceiling for one long moment, then lowered her head, defeated. You have been branded. Bim blinked. It is that bad? Another pause. Ben sat there thinking, looked down at the tiny tux, the little cloak, the oversized hat. The child very hard to stand straight while the room full of monsters chanted a name he did not understand. Then she sighed. Honestly? A small smile escaped her. It could have been worse. The name spread quickly after that, louder than before, rolling through the tent in waves until the whole place was alive with it. Excuse me. The sound rose from every side, pressing in around Bim, no longer jeering now, but something more complicated. Approval, curiosity, excitement. The kind of attention that did not forgive weakness, only waited to see whether it had chosen well. Threnza look at the little Threnza. I love the hat. Bim did not know rather the smile. He did not know rather he was allowed to. He stood beneath the lanterns with his shoulders too stiff and his hands too careful, trying to understand the difference between being mocked and being claimed. It sounded almost the same at first, only the faces were different. The mouth smiled wider, the eyes held less sharpness. Venerable's smile widened as he turned slightly, watching the reaction and drinking it in as though applause were a kind of wine he had learned to survive on long ago. Yes, he murmured, almost to himself. I see it now. His eyes flickered black towards the boy. You will be my prodigy. A small tilt of his head. You will become a spectacle. The words should have sounded triumphant. Instead, to Bim, they felt very vast, heavy, like being lifted onto a stage he had not chosen, beneath lights he did not understand, before a crowd already waiting to decide what he was worth. A spectacle. The words settled over him differently than Little Master had. Little Master sounded like something people could laugh at. Spectacle sounded like something people would look at and keep looking and expect it to do something. And still the applause continued. Bim looked down at his tux, the cloak, the shoes, the hat. He adjusted his brim one more time. His fingers shook only a little, and somewhere beneath the noise and the lantern light and impossible futures being spoken around him, he missed his mother. Just for a moment, just enough to hurt. Not in a grand way, not in a way that made the room stop. It was smaller than that, sharper. A kitchen smell that was not there, a voice that should have said his name, a hand that should have fixed his hat, even though she would have laughed first. Bim's throat tightened, and of course Ben noticed. Her hand rested briefly between his shoulders, not speaking, not asking, just there, warm through the little cloak. And somehow that helped. The applause rolled on. The lanterns burned. The menagerie welcomed him in the way it seemed to know how, too loudly, too brightly, with teeth showing and hearts hidden badly behind spectacle. Bim stood through it because Ben had told him to, because Threnzabul had told him he only needed to stand, because for now, standing was the only brave thing he knew how to do. A few hours passed, or something that felt like hours. Time inside the master tent did not behave the way Bim thought time was supposed to behave. It stretched during quiet moments, vanished during loud ones, and folded strangely around music until he could no longer tell whether 5 minutes or forever had just gone by. The master tent came alive in ways Bim did not fully follow. Acts followed in and out of the ring like shifting dreams, each replacing the last so smoothly it became difficult to tell where one performance ended and another began. Figures he had never seen before stepped into the light and bent it. One woman danced through ribbons of pale fire that floated around her like obedient serpents, each movement drawing glowing symbols through the air before they dissolved into showers of sparks and tiny stars. A towering figure with 6 arms balancing an impossible stack of crystal dishes atop fingertips no wider than a needle's width, with while laughing at jokes only he could seem to hear. Someone else unfolded shadows from a suitcase, actually unfolded them. Ben watched in silence as the entire landscape spilled out across the stage floor. Mountains, rivers, forests, and skies, each made entirely from darkness that somehow remembered the original shape. A black river wound between black hills beneath a black moon, and still every piece of it gleamed with detail. Nothing stayed ordinary for long enough to trust, nothing stayed impossible long enough to reject. The menagerie breathed through spectacle. Around him, the audience shifted, laughed, gasped, and applauded. Food appeared from places Bim never saw. Paper cone of sugar coated nuts passed hand to hand. Steam curled from cups painted with tiny golden moons. Something warm and buttery drifted beneath the sharper scents of candle smoke, velvet dust, and old magic. Lanterns changed color without warning, gold to rose, rose to blue, blue to a deep carnival red that made every smile look dangerous for 3 whole minutes before softening back again. Music drifted through the air from instruments hidden somewhere beyond sight. Sometimes it sounded like violins, sometimes like bells. Once it sounded very much like someone laughing inside a bottle, and Bim decided not to ask. Thunderbolt had vanished at some point. Not dramatically, not with declaration, he simply ceased being beside them. Bim was not entirely certain when. That realization felt appropriately unsettling. He had simply ceased being beside them. Dan sat beside him in the higher rows, observing the central ring, one elbow resting against the arm of a chair, watching the performance with the comfortable expression of someone seeing familiar things. Not impressed, not bored, but at home. That was what made Bim look at her twice. Ben did not watch the menagerie like it was impossible. She watched it like it was hers. Like the 6 star man had and the suit, like the 6 star man in the suitcase of shadows had their ribbons of fire, and the ribbons of fire were ordinary in a way a kettle was ordinary, or a creaking stair, or the particular sound a door made when someone you loved came through it. Bim sat quietly beside her, small hands folded in his lap, hat still slipping. The applause from earlier had faded from his chest, leaving something softer behind. Exhaustion, wonder, and a strange kind of loneliness that sat quietly beneath both. The chair was too large for him, even after Thrinzabul's adjustments. His feet did not quite know what to do. The cloak bunched around his legs, Every now and then, a burst of laughter rose from the crowd and made his shoulders twitch before he remembered it was not aimed at him. He watched performers move below, watched impossible things happen, watched the menagerie laugh, watched people look at one another with the easy comfort of shared strangeness. Then, finally, softly, without taking his eyes off the ring, Miss Bad? She glanced down. Hmm? Bim stared at the lights, at the people, at the impossible world around him, at the place that had welcomed him too loudly and named him too quickly and saved him before he knew rather saving meant staying. Then, "Wh- when do I go home?" Silence. Not in the tent, not around them, only beside them. The music continued below. Someone laughed. A lantern changed from gold to deep rose. Applause scattered across rows like thrown coins. But beside Bim, everything stopped. Ban didn't answer immediately, didn't look away, didn't soften. For the first time since Bim had met her, she looked unprepared. And beneath the pale lantern light of and beneath the pale lantern light above, beneath the moon hanging forever beyond worlds, something in her expression hurt. Not loudly, not in a way anyone would notice, but Bim did. Children notice when adults stop knowing what to do with their hands. Ban opened her mouth, then she closed it. For once, the law had no clean shape for what had needed saying. No command could make the truth kinder. No rule could. Oh, I kept reading, sorry. Could bend grief into something small enough for a child to hold. Not tonight, she said at last. All right. So I went a little bit later than usual, and I am going to keep pressing on. There are quite a few pages in here. I pulled a slightly bigger chunk because I felt like I wasn't actually reading enough. But we're going to continue. This is intermission. This is our ritual time. You guys know what that means. So if you're partaking tonight, join me. What does partaking mean? Partaking means, well, doing something while I'm doing something. If you enjoy sneaking a Snickers at 1 a.m. from the freezer, go get an extra one tonight, right now. That's what this is about. If you're a smoker, stop smoking, but I can't stop you. Go do that now. This is our break time. I happen to partake in the dabbening. For those of you who toke, you know what that is, and I ask you to partake with me. But before I do that, I would like to thank you for making it this far, all of you. And, you know, if you wouldn't mind, maybe answer the daily question in the comments below, like and sub. It helps spread me out there so someone else can find this weird lantern weirdo telling, hopefully, what I find is an enjoyable story. It took me a while to make. I'm still making it. It's still going. I also plan on doing Opie. But I digress. I said join me for something, and so we are going to do the dabbiting. If you do not know what that is, hello. This is my little friend, and why I said no fucking kids, essay. That's why I said no fucking kids. If you're in the room still, get the fuck out the room. Go to bed. I said it. I'm gonna say it like a goddamn adult. Get out the fucking room. Go to bed. You ain't supposed to be watching this shit. Bad parents. Shame on you. Anyways, I digress. Join me. First, we need. There you go. The fire. Now we heat everything up. This would also be a good time for you to use the bathroom. It looks like I have somebody there. Hey, Gabe, what up, buddy? Say hello to my little friend. I see you there, buddy. I just noticed I'm taking my break. It's break time. It's 11:28. I took it a little late. I'm at 28 minutes late. Eh. So we're probably gonna go a little bit over tonight, but that's okay. We're gonna tell a little bit more because I was a fucking slacker, and you know what I did? Played video games last week instead of doing this. So yes, tonight's episode is going to be a little longer. If you're sleeping, I hope your dreams are bomb. because nothing really happening, nothing scary, nothing bad. This is. Let me explain this to you. Right now, he's a kid. I'm not going to be throwing horror, but as we digress, yes, we will eventually touch on that again. But for now, I think the kid's been through enough. So right now, we're just going to learn about the menagerie. Um, oh, shiznit. Bet you ain't heard that one for a while. All right, I'm about to get my dab. About 20 seconds. 20. No. 10. Yeah, 10 seconds. Not even. Yeah, we gotta open it and shit. So, so it look like it's some gooey shit. Yeah, gooey. 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 Yeah, some gooey shit. I should have probably grabbed the correct tool for this, but it's okay. It's hot today, so it's super duper like gross gooey. And I probably should have just put it on. It's nice and easy. Hey, actually, that wasn't bad. I've had worse. Okay, hello. Here we go. That was a full log. Holy shit. All right. There's one. There's two. Let's see if Bim's or I am Bim. Wow. It's 1:30. Is time shifting or some weird shit? Nah, that can't be tonight. It's late though. It should be 12:30 there. Homie. All right. So we got a big hit because we are actually going to take a moment. I am going to go ahead and I guess I've just been reading tonight. I didn't even turn on my background music. I usually have background music. I apologize. I'm gonna throw some on while I am away. I will be back in a moment. So for now, turn it down a little bit. Make sure it's not too loud. I will be back. Enjoy your ride.
Small hands, big hat, cold room. Stand back, lanterns dim.
Break. I need to stay on this. since we're back, we're gonna go ahead and check out chat. Ew, it is hot tonight. I had to actually take off the shawl. Just too much. Or not the shawl. That was girly. What the fuck is it called? Hold on. Cloak. Oh my gosh. Or hood. Technically, it's whatever. Looks like a cult thing, but you switch it into a cloak thing. It's pretty cool. I like it. Let's see. So you're on loop. Oh wow, it reset everything? That's what I gotta be careful with. I get it now. I get it now. That's what keeps happening. Okay, that's fine. I'm gonna go ahead and set a sec because we're just talking right now. What do you think? Pretty hot. I am building a Discord. Gabe, you already know that. I got flagged for my own song. Right? So funny. Let's see. Yeah, we were right in here. If I remember right. Let's one back. Yeah, we were in here. That's fine. Just being sure, because I see what's happening now. I have to change one of the settings, but that's fine. We're gonna go right back to reading. We got nice, soft, gentle music going. We're gonna just tone it down a little bit. A little bit, not a lot. Oh, that's fine. Right there. Right. We're gonna go ahead and put the glasses on. And actually, that's gonna become, that's the thing now. There's a reason. Well, you're just wearing it to look different. No, there's a bright ass light right in front of me. And I'm pretty sure when I looked at the specs, it dropped UV. And no, thank you. So I don't really use this to read. I use it to block the light right there. You can even see my hand like, yeah. So I use it to block that. Just make sure I'm not damaging my eyes on accident. So, yay. Okay. Anyways, we are back. Let's see. No command could make the truth kinder. No rule could bend grief into something small enough for a child to hold. Not tonight, she said at last. It was not enough. It was not a promise. It was the smallest truth she could give without breaking something already cracked. Bim looked back towards the ring. I would. I did. Okay, maybe. Why did I do that? It's fine. His face went quiet in a way that made him look younger than the hat, younger than the title, younger than anything the menagerie had tried to make of him. He nodded once, barely. Not because he understood, because there was nothing else to do. Ben's hand shifted on the arm of her chair. For a second, it looked as if she might reach for him. Then she didn't. Then she did, only enough to rest her finger slightly against the back of his cloak. There, not pulling, not smothering, just there. Some performances felt joyful, bright, weightless. Others felt sharper than that, stranger, like they pressed against something deep inside him he didn't yet have words for. Wonder, maybe. Fear, maybe. The strange Jacob seeing beauty shaping into something dangerous. The crowd loved all of it. They gasped when knives turned into birds. They cheered when a woman with glass bones walked barefoot across a rope and made of moonlight. They howled with laughter when three masked acrobats pretended to murder one another in increasingly dramatic ways, then bowed when all their limbs reattached. Bim watched everything. Some of it made him forget, only for a moment. Then the forgetting would end, and the ache would be there again, sitting quietly under his ribs. And at the end, fire. A woman stepped in the center ring. The tent changed around her. Not physically, but in focus and gravity. The laughter thinned. The whispering died. Even the lanterns seemed to turn their flames towards her. Her movements were fluid and controlled. Every step carried the kind of confidence that pulled every eye toward her, whether they meant to look or not. Flames sparked between her fingers. Small at first, little gold bites of light. Then they curled along her arms in bright living ribbons. Heat shimmered around her. Light danced across her skin. The air changed too, glowing warmer, drier, touched with the scent of smoke and singed sugar. Something sharp, like struck flint. Bim sat a little straighter. The fire moved as if it knew her. As if it liked her. It licked along her wrist, wound between her fingers, and spun above her palm in glowing spirals of orange, gold, and white. It should have been wild. It should have been hungry. Instead, it listened. The flame should have frightened him. And some of them did. A little. But they were beautiful too. Terribly beautiful. When the woman opened her mouth, fire spilled from it in a long glowing arc that painted the air above the ring. The flame roared outward, bright enough to reflect in every watching eye, then curled back in on itself like a living ribbon before dissolving into sparks. The crowd erupted. Bim flinched at the Bim flinched at the sound. His shoulders jumped beneath the red velvet of his cloak. Then he stared harder. Annalise, the fire eater. Her name moved through the rows in delighted whispers and bright exclamations caught beneath the crash of applause. Annalise stood in the center of the ring, with smoke curling faintly from her lips. One hand lifted as the last sparks drifted down around her like falling stars. She smiled, not sweetly, but triumphantly, like the fire had challenged her and lost. Ben leaned slightly closer to Bim. "That," she murmured, "is Annalise." Bim didn't look away. "She eats fire?" "When she's showing off." "Does it taste bad?" Ben paused, then glanced out at him. That is not usually the first question." Bim watched Annalise bow as the flames curled around her shoulders like a glowing shawl. "So, does it taste bad?" Ben considered this with unexpected seriousness. "I imagine it tastes like poor decisions." Bim frowned. "Well, what does poor decisions taste like?" "Exactly." Below them, Annalise lifted both hands. The sparks gathered above her in the shape of a burning bird. It spread its wings once, scattering golden light across the tent. The bird gave no cry, but somehow the whole room seemed to hear one. Its wings beat slowly. Each movement shredded embers that vanished before they touched the ground. Gold light poured over the seats, over masks and horns and painted cheeks, over Ben's still face and Bim's wide eyes. In that moment, Annalise looked less like a performer and more like a dying star made furious by the idea of ending. Her red-orange hair burned in the lantern light. Elegance and fire branded together until beauty itself felt dangerous. Bim's mouth parted slightly. For a moment, fear forgot to sit in his chest. There was only the fire, the music, the impossible bird burning harmlessly above the ring, and the wonder of it. Then the bird burst into 1,000 sparks, and the crowd roared again. Bim didn't blink. The flames reflected in the eyes. The flames reflected in his eyes as Annalise moved, every motion precise, dangerous in a way that felt alive, not just performed, but lived. She did not run from the fire. She did not beg it to be kind. She held it, turned with it, trusted it only as much as it deserved. The heat reached even where Bim sat, brushing faintly against his face. It warmed his cheeks and dried the last chill still lingering in his skin from memories of the forest. The air tasted faintly of smoke and sugar, sharp at the back of his throat, but not unpleasant. His hands loosened in his lap. He hadn't noticed they were clenched until he stopped clenching them. The crowd around him answered Annalise with rising energy. Every grasp fed the next. Every burst of flame drew them tighter into the moment. Annalise looked untouchable in the center of it all, standing beneath the high canvas, dark with the fire curled around her hands and her shoulders like the fire was loyal. Like, if fire had ever chosen to become a person, it might have taken her shape. When she finished, the crowd erupted. Cheers. They crashed against the walls of the tent. Applause thundered upward into the high canvas shadows. The sound struck Bim right in the chest. He felt it there. Didn't understand it, but felt it. A pull. A spark. The beginning of wanting something before he had a name for what it was. Not fire, not exactly. Not danger either. The way everyone looked at her, the way the whole room held its breath because of something she chose to do, the way fear could become wonder when someone learned how to hold it correctly. A spectacle. The word came back to him then, not in Threnzabul's voice this time, in heat, in gold light, in the stunned silence before the applause. Then, it was over. The great flaps of the tent opened and the crowd spilled out into the night in rush voices and movement. The energy of the performance bled into the pathway of the menagerie, laughter and conversation spreading outward like warmth from a fire after the flame had begun to lower. Ban took his hand. Ben followed without speaking at first. Still half looking over his shoulder toward the emptying ring, Annalise stood near the center, speaking with someone beneath a curtain of gold light. Smoke still curled faintly from beneath her fingertips. Every now and then, a light ember blinked between her knuckles and vanished like the fire was reluctant to leave her. Ban noticed him staring. Of course she did. Careful, she said. Admiration is how performers trap children into bad decisions. Bim looked up at her. She was amazing. She knows. She can really eat fire? Yes. Can I learn that? No. The answer came too fast. Bim frowned. Why? Because I've had you for less than a day, and I'm not beginning your education with mouth fire. That's not fair. That's parenting. Bim considered that, then looked back once towards the ring. The last sparks faded from the air. But maybe later? Ben sighed, a long, tired sigh, the sigh someone who already knew she was losing a future argument. We'll discuss it later, when later is not currently 5 years old. Bim nodded, accepting that only with partial satisfaction. Outside the menagerie, night opened up around them again, bright with lanterns and music, filled with impossible roads. The pale moon hung over it all. Unmoving silver light touched the tops of tents while gold glowed beneath their awnings. The paths were crowded now with voices spilling from the master tent. Performers called to one another. Laughter burst beside striped curtains. Somewhere nearby, someone struck a bell that sounded too deep for its size, and a note rolled through Bim's bones before dissolving into the night. Bim walked beside Ben, still holding her hand. His hat slipped. He pushed it back up, and somewhere inside him, beneath the grief and fear and exhaustion, the spark remained, not large, but steady. A tiny, warm thing cupped carefully within him in the dark. "Come on," Ben said. They returned to the campgrounds, back through the threshold, back to her estate. The quiet settled around them as soon as they crossed over, wrapping around the paths and gardens like curtains falling after a performance. The pale moon still held high above them, fixed and unchanged, silvering the white stone and still water with the same calm light as it had before. After the master tent, Ben's estate felt impossibly quiet. No cheering, no music, no crowd watching to decide what she was, or what he was. Only fountains whispering in the distance, leaves shifting softly over the paths, and the faint hush of Bim's cloak dragging behind him with each tired step. Silence here was different from Ben's law. Softer, not taken, given. Bim walked slower this time, thinking. The word stayed with him. Spectacle. He did not know what it meant, not really, and that bothered him. It sat in his mind like a stone in his shoe. Small, but impossible to ignore. Threnzabul had said it like it mattered, like it was something Bim was supposed to become. But how could he become something he didn't even understand? And Elise had looked like one, or so he thought anyway. The whole room had changed when she stepped into it. People leaned forward without being asked. Fear had become something shining. Fire had become applause. But Bim was not fire. He was not brave like that. He was a little boy in a hat too big for his head, walking through a moonlight garden while trying not to think about home. They reached Ben's door. Bim stopped. Ben took another step before noticing the silence behind her. Then she turned back. He looked small again. Not because of the clothes, those fit now. Not because of the hat, that still didn't. But because the performance was over, and the little boy beneath it had nowhere left to hide. Ben's expression softened. "What is it?" Ben looked down at the white stone beneath his shoes. The shoes gave the faintest squeak. He didn't smile this time. His fingers tightened around Ben's hand, then loosened, then tightened again. "What is spectacle?" His shoes gave the faintest squeak. And again, he didn't smile. The question settled between them the question settled between them beneath the pale moonlight. Fountains whispered. The state listened. There's a lot. Yeah, actually. There's a lot. It's almost midnight. Here, I'm going to keep reading a little bit more. But we're going to cut it soon, so it's almost midnight. Van came back down the steps slowly and crouched in front of him, bringing herself closer to his height. A spectacle, she said carefully, is something people can't look away from. Ben's fingers curled around the edge of his cloak. Like Annalise? A faint smile touched Ben's mouth. Yes, like Annalise. He thought about that. She made fire pretty. She did. And scary. Yes. And everyone liked it. Van studied him for a moment. The moonlight silvered the edge of his hat. His cheeks, a little line worried between his brows. He looked so serious, standing there in the clothes that finally fit him. And that title, best of it not. Because she knew how to hold both, Ben said. Ben looked up at her then. His eyes were tired. Still too full of the night before. Oops, sorry. Do I have to be scary? The question was small enough to hurt. Ben's smile faded. No, she said softly. Not like that. Then why did he say it? Ben exhaled through her nose, choosing the honest answer. Because Threnzabul sees futures the way other people see stages. Ben frowned. That doesn't make any sense. No, Ben admitted. But it's unfortunately true. She reached up and adjusted the brim of his hat before it could fall over his eyes again. He sees what people might become if given the right light, the right pressure, and the right audience. Bim swallowed. And what does he see in me? Ben's hand paused on his brim. For a moment, her face went very still. The fountains kept whispering behind them. Somewhere in the garden, leaves shifted through the wind, though nothing touched them. The estate felt as if it were holding its breath with her. Then, Ben answered quietly. Something that survived. Ben looked down again. The moonlight made the white path go around his feet. I don't want everyone looking at me. I know. I don't want to be important. I know. His voice thinned. I just want... He stopped, because the rest of the sentence had nowhere safe to go. I just want my mom. I just want home. I just want yesterday back. The words crowded behind his teeth, too big and too broken to say aloud. If he said them, he thought they might become real in a way he could not bear. Ben did not make him finish. She only pulled him gently against her, one arm wrapping around his small shoulders, while the other steadied the ridiculous hat on his head. I know, little light, she whispered. The estate remained quiet around them, not empty, not watching, just holding. After a moment, Bim's hands clutched at her robe. At first, carefully, then harder, his fingers twisted into the fabric as if it were the only steady thing in the whole impossible world. His face pressed against her shoulder, the brim of his hat caught awkwardly between them. Ben did not tell him it would be all right. She did not tell him not to cry. She only held him there beneath the unmoving moon, on the glowing white path, while the last echoes of applause faded somewhere far, far behind them. A spectacle he was beginning to understand was something people could not look away from. But this was not a spectacle. This was small, quiet, and afraid. And maybe, for that reason, safer. Ben rested her cheek lightly at the top of his oversized hat, then sighed. A spectacle doesn't have to mean being used, she said softly. It can mean becoming bright enough that the dark regrets chasing you. Bim stayed still against her, thinking about fire, about applause, about Threnzabul's hand on his shoulder, about the monster in the woods, the thing that had wanted him open, the thing that had worn almost voices and followed him through the trees. Finally, he whispered, "Can I be bright without everyone clapping?" Ben's eyes softened. "Yes," she said. "That might be the best kind." The hat slipped sideways between them. Ben closed her eyes. "That hat is a curse." Bim gave the smallest, tired laugh into her robe, tiny, muffled, but real. Ben smiled despite herself. Then she stood, keeping hold of his hand. "Come on, come inside." Ben looked down once more towards the pale moon over the estate, still fixed, still endless. Silver light lay over the garden's path, over the fountain's rims, over the leaves that seemed too quiet after the master tense roar. For a moment, he thought about how strange it was that the moon here did not move, when everything else in the menagerie seemed unable to stay still. Then he followed her through the door. But the word followed too, spectacle, not as loudly, not with Threnzabul's voice wrapped around it, or applause pressing back, or hundreds of eyes waiting to decide what Bim was worth. Here, in the quiet, it became smaller and somehow heavier. "Miss Van," he said, hesitating, his fingers tightening around the edge. "I think I understand a little, but I don't know how it works." Ben watched him for a moment, then softly, not annoyed, not impatiently, just thoughtful, like she was adjusting the shape of the conversation in her head before deciding the best way to let him, to give it to him. For all the strange things in the menagerie, this part, stopping for a child who was scared to ask because he didn't want to sound foolish, felt almost painfully human. I gotta take these out. It's hard to see him. Just. "All right," she said, stepping closer. "Come here." She nudged the door open wider and guided him inside, one hand light against his back. The kitchen welcomed them the same way, with the warm stillness as it had before. Soft lantern light pulled across the wooden table. The kettle sat quiet on the stove. The air still carried traces of breakfast, tea, warm bread, and the faint floral scent of something that seemed to follow Ben's estate through every room. After smoke and velvet applause. The smell of bread felt almost like hands against his forehead. Outside the window, the pale moon remained fixed on the sky. Inside, everything felt smaller, kinder. The table did not expect anything from him. The chairs did not stare. The kettle did not care that he had been named Little Master. Ben pulled a chair for him. Sit. Ben climbed into it carefully, the cloak bunched awkwardly beneath him. The hat slid down over his eyes. He pushed it back up again with both hands. Ben stared at the hat. I hate that it's growing on me. Ben blinked. The hat? No, the tragedy. He didn't understand that, but her tone made it feel safe enough not to. Ben sat across from him and folded her arms on the table. For a moment, she did not speak. She simply looked at him the way she had looked at the crowd earlier, but gentler, not measuring whether he belonged, measuring how much truth he could carry. A spectacle, she said slowly, is something people remember. Ben listened carefully. Not just because it's loud. Not just because it's pretty. Not just because people clap. She tapped her fingers gently against the table. A true spectacle changes the room. Ben frowned. Like fire? Yes, Annalise changes the room because she makes people feel something all at once. Fear, wonder, joy, and excitement. Ben leaned back slightly. She takes something dangerous and teaches everyone watching how to be amazed by it instead of only afraid of it. I think I messed that up. No, that's fine. Ben looked down at his sleeves. The cuffs fit now. That still felt strange. Am I dangerous? Ben went quiet, only for a moment. Then she answered honestly, not in the way you think. That didn't fully comfort him. You were not dangerous because you want to hurt people, she said. You were dangerous because something wanted to use you and now it can't. Ben swallowed. Because of Threnzabul? Because of your choice, Ben corrected softly. Threnzabul opened the door. You walked through it. Ben thought about that. The lantern, the forest, the thing outside the barrier. His own small voice saying, yes. He had not felt powerful then. He had felt like his lungs were burning, his legs were going to give out, and the dark behind him knew his name. Ben's expression softened. A spectacle is not just performance, little light. Sometimes it's survival made visible. The words settled between them, warm, strange, but heavy. Ben looked up. So, I'm supposed to make people look? Ben's mouth twitched faintly. No, they're gonna look anyway. That made his stomach sink. Ben reached across the table, gently tapped the brim of his oversized hat, and lifted it upward before it could fall again. You were supposed to decide what they see. Ben stared at her. For once, he did not answer her right away. The moonlight stayed pale beyond the window. The kitchen stayed warm around them, and very slowly, the word spectacle began to feel less impossible. Not easy, not safe, but something he might one day understand. And that's where I'm going to cut it, because it's 2:10. So I'm going to wish everybody have a good night. I got things I have to take care of, but I am going to say, hey, we made it this far. Thank you for staying tuned. Next Friday, it will be this one. I have a couple episodes planned out of this, and then I'm going to try an experimental episode that is, I would just refer to as Project Opie for now. If you're out there and you're a truck driver, or maybe you downloaded this or found a way to listen to it while you're flying, or maybe you're on a boat, be safe out there, because somebody loves you. Even if you don't have anyone, someone cares, and they would want to see you again. So take care, and remember, stay true and make it home. I'm going to put on that song as I always do and close out the same way I normally close out, except I think I did this a little early, but that's okay. Have a good night. I am sorry. It was not supposed to jump like that. I apologize, but have a good night. Go ahead and
small hands, big hat, cold room, stand back, lanterns dim, voices bite, a little spark chose the light. They said child, they said weak, they said he don't belong. Every word came falling down like thunder in a song. No fire, no scream, no blade in the air, just one quiet law and a cold silver stare. He chose the light when the dark came near. He chose to run through the teeth of fear. He chose the door, he chose to live. Small don't mean empty, and fear can give a heart to stand, a name to keep, a lock where the shadows wanted to creep. He chose the light, he chose the light, a little spark in the lantern night. Not a vessel, not a toy, not a door for something old, not a hollow little frame for another hand to hold. If the dark wants in, then the answer is no. Make the child a lock and let the lanterns glow. He chose the light when the dark came near. He chose to run through the teeth of fear. He chose the door, he chose to live. Small don't mean empty, and fear can give a heart to stand, a name to keep, a lock where the shadows wanted to creep. He chose the light, he chose the light, a little spark in the lantern night.
Small is not weak, new is not empty. Mercy ain't a mistaken fear, don't tempt me. Small is not weak, new is not empty. He is the lock, now let the room remember. Talk, talk, hat still slips. Small flame, iron grip. Talk, talk, voices thin, stand tall, don't let them in. He chose the light, he chose the light.
Little spark in the lantern night.